This is going to be an exciting episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast. And guess what? This podcast guest is going to be speaking at the Recruiting Growth Summit. So make sure to get signed up. Link is in the comments. It is free to sign up. We have so many amazing speakers, and I cannot wait for 2024 to be your best year yet. Enjoy the podcast. I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast. I have a special guest, and we're going to talk about how she started a recruiting company without any recruiting experience. 6 years later, sold it for $28 million, a $28 million exit. And since then has also sold multiple other companies. But I mean, think about that. Knowing nothing about recruiting, jumping in headfirst, building a company, scaling a company, and then selling it and to be able to exit for $28 million. So I am excited to welcome Diane Prince to this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Benjamin. Super stoked to be here.
So before we get started, give the audience a little bit more about you.
Yeah. So as my name is Diane, and I've been in this business for my experience in recruiting and staffing spans over 3 decades, and now I help recruiting agency owners to build their businesses beyond just direct hire placements. If they want to, right? Not if they want to be a solopreneur or whatever, that's cool. But what my thing is really helping people to build a full, robust business with recurring revenue that you could eventually sell, you could eventually exit, but also you're be able to support yourself very nicely in the process.
Well, and I'm sure we're going to like kind of intertwine this into your story, but let's talk about how you even ended up in recruiting. Let's start there.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So for me, it started with knowing what our end game was instead of being in recruiting and saying, "Hey, let's start a recruiting business." It was with my then husband. We were like 26 and we started to think about it. And our idea was, let's see if we can figure out a business that we could build together and then sell it. So that was really the goal. So that's why when I work with people, I always want to work with like, what do you want to get out of this? Because then we work backwards and came up with the idea of temp staffing for title insurance people. That was
Well,
the first thing.
real quick, like, did you guys look at other business models and like, why'd you guys end up on recruiting?
Okay, so I had temped through college and grad school. My first experience, like even knowing what it was, is I used to get student work permits and I'd work in Europe over during college. So I was 19, tapping literally 3 days after I'd gotten to London. I don't know why this does that. I went in. I was literally tapping beer at a pub in Piccadilly Circus like 19 years. I just like thrown in. I basically flew there, saw a job posting on a bulletin board, and someone and I'm like have no idea how to tap beer, right? And so some English man goes, "How fast do you type?" And then I start. That's how I learned about temping. So I temp my way like all through London. It was great, and then I through grad school I did. And so I knew about that industry, like just from that side, from being a temporary employee, and then we married it with title insurance. I mean, it's kind of random, but my dad was in title insurance for his entire career. And it was actually his idea. We were at dinner one night because we kept on brainstorming different business ideas. And then he goes, "Why don't you start a temp agency for title insurance?" And we're like, "Oh." And then we researched it a little bit and then just dove in.
Wow. Okay. So you guys picked recruiting, picked a business that you can build, scale it, and exit. So like, what's the next part of the story? You guys like hit go, hit start. What happened next?
So, okay, well, first it was so we wrote a business plan. So before we were both working, we both had full-time jobs. And so we bought a book that I was so wish was still in print, or I had it, called How to Start a Temp Agency for Dummies. It was one of those yellow and black books like for dummies. And that series literally bought that book. And then we spent the weekends writing a business plan. And then we put an ad in the paper for our title assistant. That was one of the roles we knew we were going to fill. We had no idea, by the way, what a title assistant did, and put the ad in the paper. And back then, I mean, it was a PO box. So I rented a PO box near my work every day at lunch. I'd go look. And for literally the first day I got a resume, I was so excited. I couldn't believe someone actually sent me a resume. I cried. I was so excited, and I quit my job the next day.
That
And
is,
I had no clue. Like we went straight to staffing. We didn't do direct hire or anything like that. So it was like we had W-2 employees almost right away. I mean, it was like it happened pretty fast, but like didn't even know like anything about like workers' comp or the things that you had to do. So we just learned. I mean, it was like, oh shit, like oh sorry, they're like we got to do this, we got to do this. It was totally one step at a time.
and when did you guys like make your first like internal hire in that process?
Yeah, it was, so we had like it was probably about, 3 or 4 months in. So, yeah, yeah, it was
And
about 3 or 4 months in.
between like the two models, like why did you guys choose staffing versus like a direct placement model?
Well, because we wanted to build a business that we could scale and sell. So, I mean,
Okay.
we didn't even think about about a direct hire model or anything like that. That didn't
Okay.
even 'cause we didn't come from the recruiting industry, so it wasn't like, "Oh, let's do this, or that'll still be easier." We didn't know anything, so we just started attempting.
And because you've now seen like the selling side of the things, like most often, what type of recruiting business actually gets bought?
Well, you have to have recurring revenue. So there's a few elements that you have to have, and this is
Okay.
something that new founders can do from the beginning if they do want to scale. So if they're thinking about building something, so you have to have a team. You have to not be the person like the business cannot just rely on you, you know. So you have to have an executive team. You have to have diversification of your clients. I call it the anchor client strategy. So you have to have at least 3 clients that if everything else goes to hell, you can still your business would still sustain itself. In a later business, we specialized in mortgage during the 2008 financial crisis. Our biggest client was Countrywide, and their CEO was literally, if you Google him, he was literally called the poster child of the financial crisis, but we still stayed in business. I mean, it was crazy. Like they went bankrupt. They went to B of A. We didn't get Bank of America's business. So having a diversified client base, having that's why staffing is very good for exits because and RPO is another recurring revenue model that you can have. There's different models, but with staffing, your clients can't really operate. Once you scale and you have enough contractors or employees in their business, they can't really function without your employees. So that that helps.
Okay, so like we're gonna like jump back over to your own personal story. Okay, so you guys started growing this company, you started scaling. Like, what were some of the lessons that you learned along the way before you exited?
Oh my gosh, there were so many. One is stay focused on what you do best because being entrepreneurial tends to be, at least for me, I can get very, I get shiny new yes, exactly, shiny new object, like crazy. So, it can be really hard to keep trudging through the monotonous parts because it's a very different skill set to start a business than to run it, to hire. So really to not like, I mean, we started a school, we started we shut down like all these other things we started and they just ended up taking cash out of the business and being a huge distraction. So, so what I learned is stick with what you do best in your core, what your core business is. And then also if you have not managed, like I was a terrible manager and I really had to learn, I mean, I just didn't know. Like I was, we're both in our 20s and like so pretty sure we were just everybody hated us. But they did come back when we started another business. But I guess it wasn't that bad. But I would really learn how to manage and and also take care of your own kind of issues because as a founder and especially as you scale and you have lots of employees, all of your issues, come to the table in business as well.
Ooh, is there any like lessons that you wish you didn't have to learn during that first business?
I don't know if that because it just, like, I spent I knew you were gonna ask questions about, like, looking back, and I spent about 8 years trying to change the previous 18. So that's a whole other story.
Mm.
So I try not to kinda, like, look back at things like that, but I think all of the lessons that there were so many bumps in the road. I think I, had just had to learn just had to learn them, because it's just part of life. And, I don't know if I was always like, I've learned to be kind, and there's a lot of things I've learned, like be a better manager, be kind. Like there were just things that were just so crazy and always building. And, so I've learned a lot of things along the way. And I think I'm grateful for those lessons.
Okay, awesome. So if a company or if somebody is looking at building a recruiting company to sell or to sell, you
Hmm.
said that there's like some foundational pillars. So I know, can you recap like the things that you need to focus on if you're starting at square one, but you're looking down the road and you want to sell your company in anywhere from 6 to 10 years? What are the principles in place that you have to be able to do that?
Yeah, you want to be strong operationally, but you want to have clean cut accounting. So then that was one lesson we learned too. I mean, like literally from trying to figure it out myself on QuickBooks was not a pretty picture. So bring in accounting help as quickly as possible. And also even just if your budget doesn't, if you can't handle a CFO or just somebody, some kind of a financial advisor to actually review your business model and your plan to make sure that it is scalable as you're starting to build and add and hire. So operationally sound, know your numbers. It's really common for entrepreneurs to not really know what their what their break even point is, even, and their expenses and income. So get really familiar with your numbers. So accounting, operations, team, build the best team that you can, and don't cheap out on equity and things like that. Don't cheap out on salaries and don't cheap out on equity. So get the best people that you can get to help you to run your business, and people around you. That's super important. So it's team, and and you have to diversify your client base. So always be looking at that. You don't have a business if you only have like, if one client is over 50-60% of your business, that's not really a business. So you've got to always keep adding to your pipeline. So you need to diversify your client base. And yeah, that's and you have to have recurring revenue.
Okay. Well, you mentioned something that like I don't hear too often in the recruiting space, like team members with equity. Are you talking about like everybody having equity, or is it like kind of like an executive leadership position?
No, not everybody, but I find, and I've coached other kinds of founders too, like staffing, recruiting founders, and tech founders, and I found that if you are when I'm talking about well, we did have people who had like managers. Some managers had equity, not everybody had equity. But when you're bringing in someone who's a super key player, like think about this, because of the whole startup scene, people have sort of gotten into the habit of giving like 0.5% of equity. But in our business, that's not that meaningful. So, I mean, people did buy into our company as well, so they had skin in the game. But we were pretty generous with our president who we brought in once I was pregnant. And I was on bed rest for 3 months because I was, like, working up, and that was a whole other thing. I was working like a maniac. So we brought in a president, then we also had a COO, so key players, and we were pretty generous with equity. I mean, otherwise we would have come out with maybe a lot more money, I don't know, but I always kind of figured if I'd rather have a smaller piece of a pie that is more successful and has more chances to getting to where we wanna be.
Okay. And okay, so real quick, you were doing everything up until you got put on bed rest during your pregnancy. Like, what was the final straw that just like I need more help? Like,
Having contractions at it's just like 3 months before I was due. Literally, and then I drove myself to the hospital. Like, I was nuts. I was absolutely nuts. I mean, and that's the thing is, like, people say, um, "You were so lucky," or, like, we had when we sold our business, some of our employees were like, "It's like you won the lottery," and we're like, "No, we actually, like, made a business plan, executed on it nonstop." But no, but really what we knew is what we did because we knew that we had this exit in mind all the time. We had a team of advisors. So, and one key advisor was an investment banker, and we met with him every quarter. We said, "This is where we're at." And he was ultimately the one that brokered our deal. But so we'd go to him and get advice. We didn't know anything. I mean, so we were like, what do we need now? And then that's when we brought in our first other executive team member. And then, from then we knew like operations, like that was that, kind of, I guess we kind of knew, but we asked for a lot of help.
Okay. It was mostly like, wanted to ask that question because a lot of like entrepreneurs, like we have to do it all ourselves. We have to do it all ourselves until like we hit a point where something is breaking. And it sounds like breaking wise, was technically you during your pregnancy.
Oh, yeah. And I will say that the first key, because people ask me a lot of like, who is the first key employee? And so, and I really believe in hiring for personality. And also, I believe that everybody, especially in an early stage company, the company has to be, they have to be motivated to be there. Like a business has to be a vehicle for them to get what they want, like whatever their next stage is or whatever. So my first employee she was 17 going to Pasadena City College waitressing. And there was just something about, okay, now she is head of APAC and Meta. So when I work with people, a lot of people are like, they have to have like 3 years of this experience or whatever. I don't believe in that. I believe in finding it. And then that first hire, like she did a lot of just everything that needed to be done. There's that, like in a small business, there's that first key role that's sort of like an operations integrator. And then that role later becomes a COO. That's another key player that you need.
Okay. So we were, on the same like theme of hiring. And you couldn't have like sold your business if you didn't have additional recruiters outside of yourself and your husband, correct husband. Like when you're looking at hiring recruiters, first of all, when should you hire and how do you hire?
Yeah. So when is really key because hiring can seem like it's growth, but it's not necessarily growth. You have to look at it when you're looking at your first hires, is that hiring can also be a huge liability. So first you want to look at like what do you need to accomplish? What is it that you want? What is it that you need to get done? And how can you do that most efficiently? It might be an offshore person. Like it might be a virtual assistant. So looking at it might even be like an app. So really looking at instead of saying like I need whatever job description or job title, look at the actual tasks and then see how you can accomplish those. And then when you're ready to hire, be systematic about it. Recruiters are known to be terrible for hiring for ourselves because we're so used to selling people. We want to see all the good in people, so we're total pushovers when we're right. You're dying laughing. I think is this like, are you relating?
Oh my God. Yes. My first like hire was like a salesperson and everything in the world happened. I'm like, I believe in you. Yeah, keep going.
Like have a system. So I learned that the hard way and having a system in place. I was at a tech recruiting company pretty recently. And so like I really learned that there. And we put a really strong hiring system in place to bring on internal people.
Well, and I want to take a few steps back, and this is for the listeners. So one of the things that like I typically advise people, and the reason why I'm asking this question is maybe I'm advising people wrong. When you're looking at starting like a recruiting company, a direct hire is one of the easiest places to start because you don't have to pay for the overhead and all those things. But you guys jumped in and like went 100% into staffing. One of the barriers to entry half the time, and I got an episode coming up talking about factoring, is
Mhm.
the hey, how the hell do I pay this person? It's net 15, net 30, net 45. I now have to pay this person weekly, and I'm waiting 45 days for the invoice to be paid. Like, what do you do when you're getting started?
Okay. Well, first of all, direct hire can be a really good way to start. If you're able to then stash away some money, that can be a way to finance your if you don't to avoid factoring. Okay, so that is an option. Like you could really start a contingent firm and put away a couple 100,000 in a year or something like that and do that. So that is an option. So there's different ways to look at it. Also, when you mentioned like net 15, net 30, I was talking to a founder the other day and he just like mentioned how his, invoices are net 30. I said, wait, whoa, why? And he goes, I just thought that's what everybody did. And I was like, no, hold up, hold up. So when I work with my clients, like we talk about onboarding when you onboard your clients and there's no net 30. There's if they push, like sometimes of course we have to make concessions and we have to negotiate, but setting up your billing expectations up front because we had our collections were like, I mean, they were there's always gonna be people don't pay, but we were, like, on top of our collections from the beginning. Our clients paid weekly, most of them, most of them. So, like, we were totally on top of it. So you can, kinda train your client. This is how it works. We pay weekly, you bill weekly, so that's an option. I mean, we borrowed money. We were really I mean, my parents gave us $35,000. So, like, from that, then we were able to use that. So, I mean, I'm just saying, like, you can also borrow or, be lucky and get a loan from friends and family. One of my clients they're a brand new agency and they have a traditional credit line from a bank. So there are other financing options, and then there's factoring, like you mentioned.
What what financing option would you recommend first out of all those?
Well, first is I would recommend either starting out direct hire, and
Okay.
if you do that though, because people get kinda worried about like, if I get asked all the time, like, "How is selling staffing different?" It's not really. So, if you start direct hire, then you wanna ask people, "Do you also use contractors? How can we also help you with contractors?" And you're just gathering information because while you're sitting there doing the contingent stuff, your competitors over there filling all their, 25 contractors. Well, you're not even asking. So, so that's one way to start. And, can't even remember what you asked me. Oh, the best way. I mean, and also like if you can get friends and family money, we paid it back within a year. We needed another 30K because we are growing so fast. We paid it back. Then we got a traditional line of credit from the bank. And then there were times when we were growing really rapidly because we got up to the $1 million weekly billing. So that was like, you can imagine the payroll we had to come up with. I mean, it was, so we did, we did have to put there were times when we were like, selling off stocks and stuff like that. So, you know, um, I mean, it's always better to not if you don't have to do factoring, don't do it because it can be really expensive. And if you do it, I have a post and some content about what the things are that you can negotiate. So don't just take their terms. There's a lot of things that if you are negotiating with the factoring company and considering it, there's different terms that you need to negotiate.
And this kind of goes into the question on selling. If you're looking at selling your company, can you actually sell it if your back end is factoring, or do you have to have everything in house financially?
Like be a detriment to buyers, if buyers see that they're gonna have to enter into this agreement with factoring. So you wanna be able to cancel the agreement. So don't get into super long-term agreements with factoring companies.
Definitely something to think about that most people probably are not. So, yeah, when you got up to $1 million in payroll, you guys had a $28 million exit. What is a typical is it a 5x rate, a 3x rate for recruiting companies when you're looking at selling, or is it like
Yeah,
a
another, like, really and I just did an interview with an M&A guy, and it's so funny because I asked him that question because I knew there's no answer, and he was like, gave me the answer that there's no I'm like, "I know, I just wanted." So, but it's really it's about, like, I mean, it can range anywhere from, like, 3 to 7 times EBITDA.
okay?
So it's pretty wide range.
And the reason why I wanted to ask that is because I do have seen people sell their direct hire companies, but it's nowhere close to the,
Mm.
how many X's you get when you have a staffing company. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I learned, is that it's funny because when you're first starting out, you're watching every penny, and then founders tend to, when you get to the point where you have deals on the table, like, we'd be like, "Just sign it. Just sign it." Their advisors were like, "No, you're walking away from, like, whatever, like, it's another 750K," or, but, like, by that point, it's like, you just want the deal to close. So that's another thing. It's you wanna have a trusted advisor with you to help you to kind of talk sense into you.
how do you go find that trusted advisor that can lead you on that path?
Well, we had advisors from the beginning. So, and you can now, I mean, now there's like me, there's coaches. I always tell people if they're afraid of going into contracting, I always say just ask your clients if they do contracting, and then call me. I'll help you figure it out. So, but yeah, having someone, it helps to have someone who's been through it. So whether it's a business coach who's been through it, who's sold their own businesses, I think it's good to have that perspective because even if it's a business broker, and it depends on how big you are. Like, at 8 figures, you want someone different than if you're doing like, 7 figures, or it's just, or, it's just different based on kind of what your numbers are. So, you wanna have somebody who's gone through, like, a team of advisors, so somebody probably who's gone through it as a founder. That's important because you get their perspective, and then also you need, like, the lawyer, the legal, and the financial experts as well.
Mm, awesome. And we've been sitting there talking about making all this money. We've been talking about awesome exits of staffing companies and other companies you've helped scale. But to get there, you got to have sales. You got to have clients. What is working right now to get new clients?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm big on biz dev. So, and that's a lot of what we do, and, because I wanna get help you I mean, like, get an exit can seem so far away, but, let's get to your first 500K, or, your first few clients. So what's working now? What is working now is not the same for every person or every agency. There is not one magic bean that some other agency has that you don't have. So some of my and I get to see because I have all sorts of different clients that are selling in different ways. So when people ask me, my clients will sign up and they're like, okay, what's the best way for biz dev? And sorry to disappoint you, but the best way is the way that you are going to, that is going to work for you and that you're going to consistently do it. So, I like cold outreach. I do cold outreach. I teach cold outreach. It works for me. Like I just was doing some biz dev for a recruit. I'm not doing, don't get excited. Because I'm not people out. I'm not doing it now. But the kind of literally cold email. But if done the right way, it has to be done the right way. And then, but also, there's so many different. I believe in first going to your warm leads, because as recruiters, it's all putting the pieces together. Candidates, clients, clients that go to other companies, candidates that become hiring managers. I'll share my little best tip in getting in biz dev is, if you any clients, any candidates, any solid candidates who take a job that's not your job through another recruiter, I always get them. I always get them as my client. So, because I treat them like I had placed them. I take them to lunch, or, virtual lunch or whatever. So I act like, most recruiters just go off into the ether and, move on to the next transaction. But it's cliche, but this business really is about relationships. And that's something that people just tend to they kind of ignore all these relationships that we have and start from scratch with like Apollo, or this, sourcing leads is fine and it's good and it works, but I start with the people that you actually know, and the people also you can look at it like, who do I know, and also who knows me.
Mm, great. I love that because we've had a few other guests that sit there and talk about capitalizing on the placements that other recruiters make. And those are the ones that end up becoming clients because you actually do a better job taking care of that person than the actual
Mhm.
recruiter that placed them.
Yes. Yes.
Phenomenal. And so, want to bef- before we jump over to the quick fire questions,
Mhm.
if you are looking at drawing up a game plan to sell your company, is there anything else that, 5, 10 years from now, is there anything else that you need to make sure that's squared away, or things that you should be thinking of right now that we didn't already mention?
Yes. I would say one of the most overlooked things is networking with other staffing executives, but go way beyond your level. Like I networked with, like, I spoke at Staffing Industry Analysts. This is another that was that business I mentioned to you that I took over when I was CEO, and I had been out of the industry for a little while. So I volunteered to speak at Staffing Industry Analysts. I got to meet executives at all the giant, you know, all like the biggest, Kelly and Adecco and Manpower. I got invited to Manpower to speak. So don't underestimate networking, and network like way beyond where you're at. Get known, because I've also, like, I've hired investment bankers. I've also sold a business just literally from just picking up the phone and calling people, because I also developed relationships with people in the industry.
Are you saying that because those people, or was this part of your strategy because those people are the actual buyers of agencies?
Yeah, some of them, some they're the buyers and they're the people that know buyers, and yeah. Mm.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because it's something that I always see in the EC government contracting space when, small, mid-size, and government, real quick, government contractors are just very intense, unique staffing companies. But you start playing around with the bigger guys, go into those larger events 5, 2, 3 years before you're looking at selling. And I mean, selling is once again a relationship business.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had one division where we just placed VMS people. So it was just like a very high volume, low margin staffing. And that was again, that one business, we had a lot of turnaround that was going on in that business. So we decided to sell off that, spin off and sell off that one division to infuse some cash flow. And I mean, we were about to go to the staffing industry analyst event in Miami that was like crazy expensive, and then one of my executives was like, "You can't go." And I'm like, "No, I'm going and I'm selling the VMS division at that conference." So I like hopped on a plane and I mean, literally it was like the first night at some garden party. And I'm talking to someone. He's like, "Oh yeah, we met at one of the like career builder used to have these like crazy boondoggles." And he's like, "Oh yeah, we met at like the career builder, whatever." He ended up he was working with a private equity firm to do exactly basically, not to go to belabor all the details, but the deal ended up happening because of that conversation. Because I'd met him at the career builder thing, then ran into him at the lawn party.
How did you keep track of all these relationships over the year?
I struggle with being organized like that. So I'd love to say like I have the system. And I think I just, you know, I don't even know the answer. I think, I guess I would say like communicating and giving and nurturing relationships when you're not asking for something. So offering value. And, I'm sure there, and people kind of come in and out of your life, but just and be curious about other people. So you're not just always like taking, but really like when you go to things like that, even if you're just going to a local networking event, go into it instead of thinking about what your pitch is going to be. Just go into it being curious about other people and remember people's names. And that's huge. You'll be like, you're like way above the rest.
Awesome. Well, before we jump over to quick fire questions, is there anything else that you want to share about building, scaling, and selling a staffing firm?
Yeah, I mean, you can do it. Like, look at, I mean, there's so many success stories, and it's hard work. It's really hard work. But this industry is an industry where you don't need a special degree. You don't even need a degree. I mean, you just need a lot of grit. And it's not, people say like it's saturated. Everything's saturated. I mean, it's like there's always new niches. There's always new technology, and just it just takes a lot of grit. And also don't worry if you don't know how to do everything. Like I just started without knowing anything. So don't feel like you have to know like everything about whatever it is. Just, it's like I take a lot from the startup world, and just start before you're ready.
I absolutely love that because I think that's what holds a lot of recruiters back is the fear of not knowing what you're going to do when you hit that start button.
Yeah. And also remember, you can be creative. You might have some different spin, like RPO, for example, has so many different kinds of versions of it, recruitment process outsourcing, and just entrepreneurship is creative. Otherwise, just stay in your job. So if you're an entrepreneur, like we get to do it how we want to. So don't worry so much about the competition or how it's supposed to be done. Have fun with it. It's not that serious. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, jumping over to the quick fire questions.
Cool.
What advice would you give to a recruiter that's just getting started in the recruiting industry?
Okay. Be a good listener. Learn active listening skills. That's going to get you really far.
Awesome. And same question, but for people that have been around the block 5, 10, 15, me almost like 2 decades in,
Uh-huh.
what advice would you give to the recruiters out there to continue to have success?
Probably the same answer. It's really like just yeah, listen and be as on it. Just when in doubt, just default to honesty. Don't feel like just remember like you're introducing like your job is to introduce the hiring managers or talent or whatever to the candidates, to introduce them to each other and share as much, be as transparent and share the details. And if you take away the idea of like pitching or trying to convince someone and you just are completely like the best recruiters I've seen and biz dev people are the people that just say it, are super clear and there it takes a lot of pressure off of you too, and you don't think that you have to be pitching.
Awesome. Is there a book that has had a huge impact on your own personal career?
Yes, I have 2 of them right here. So there's 2 I'm gonna recommend because I listened to your podcast, and I think these are ones that haven't been recommended yet. So, okay, Rework is one of my favorites, and it's actually not about recruiting, it's about startups, but I love it. It's so much it's just packed with common sense advice that I really like. It's Rework by Jason Fried and David Hannemeyer Hansen. If you're in tech at all, they created Ruby's on Rail software. Okay, then the other one is The Power of a Positive No, because a lot of people, I would know me, like I realized that all of my problems were from not by not setting boundaries. So this is a really good book on like even like it comes up so many times, like even firing people or not. You just power negotiating power positive. No, it's by William Ury, URY.
Awesome. And like, why did those 2 books completely stick out for you?
Well, because rework, when I read it, I'm like, oh gosh, yes. Like I wish just that there's things in there like ignore your competition. Um, don't um don't accept outside money unless you have to, or unless it's like, like personal loan, friends and family, something like that. There's just a lot, just a ton of really practical advice that I think people kind of make business like too opaque or something that seems so scary. So it really helps to kind of break it down, I think, and just make a lot more sense out of it. And then the power of a positive no is that like it comes up a lot with my clients. It's a lot of that like our own personal stuff. And people can have a really hard time disappointing other people. And it also comes to play like if you're building your business, sometimes you can't like people ask me all the time, how did you have a work-life balance? Like I had 3 kids at the same time. I didn't. Like I had nannies and housekeepers and I didn't really like there were a lot of things I didn't do. So there's with my kids, I did have flexibility because I own the business. So I could be at things when I really wanted to, but like there are, so really like there's times when you have to say no, if whatever it is, it might be a social event. It might be, so really like it helps to know that also if you're disappointing other people, that's okay. Like they're allowed to be disappointed, but that doesn't have to change your answer.
I absolutely love that. Now, jumping over to artificial intelligence and recruiting, what's your thoughts on the future?
Okay, so having been through having been through like so many technological advances. Now, when I think I posted a picture on LinkedIn today about look with me at a fax machine. So like I've been doing this for I'm very old, but
No, you're not.
my first assignment in London, I had to use they had made me use a fax machine, and I had no idea how to do it, and I overheard the office manager saying to the other employee, "Remind me never to hire a temp again." So that was my first assignment. Anyway, um, there's been I mean, I think that, it's great to have tools, they can improve especially, I mean, AI, it's mind-blowing what we can do with ChatGPT and AI. But, people have been talking about in the last 30 years that I've been in this business, people have been talking about how technology is gonna replace people. So, we're still here. So,
Love that. Now, do you have like a favorite rec tech tool that you love that you've recommended to your clients?
I thought about this because it is always changing. I mean, like whose favorite is not ChatGPT right now? I mean, it's like in all its different iterations. Like I started using Typing Mind. Someone talked about it on your podcast. I mean, it's just dressed up in all different different outfits, but it's all basically ChatGPT. So, I mean, I'd like to think of something like creative that other people haven't said, but I'm like, who's not like that's you know, it's just how could that not
Perfect.
be my favorite?
And jumping back, and I should have just like continued this thread after the books, but looking at your own personal success, you've built, scaled, worked your ass off, sold companies. What do you think has been a huge driver for your own personal success?
A lot of it is my personality. I'm
Yeah.
I'm I realized building my first business, I realized how much I liked building businesses and being entrepreneurial. So I think leaning into my personality, because there's been it hasn't been all, all what is it, butterflies and butterflies and roses or something like that. I mean, I got divorced. I mean, a lot of things happen. Um, so I think though that my like the more experienced I get, I'm not going to say older, I'm going to say more experienced I get, the more that I realize to lean into who I am and do things that, we only have a limited time on this planet. So I think that's it. And just continually to realize, like, okay, I believe we only live once. Um, and I'm going to do it my way, and just having that constant drive. And I'd rather, even though things can be really hard, and I had a clothing business, so when I was and that did not go well, like that. So, that was a big disaster. So just, but always like I'm very resilient and have been able to pick myself up and also to ask for help when I need help.
Okay. And I'm going to ask this question twice in two different ways. So, everything that you know now, if you could have a cup of coffee with yourself shortly after you got out of school, as you're entering the workplace, what would you actually tell yourself for advice?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because I thought about this question a lot. I mean, I probably, and this is like, I don't know, like oh gosh, I don't know if I would have gotten divorced while I still had all my money. I would tell myself a lot about relationships. I would tell myself to value myself and to listen to my gut and to go with my gut and trust myself, not trust others blindly.
I'm going to ask that same question again,
Yeah.
but like focusing on the recruiting and the staffing business. Like, what would you tell yourself in the early days if you got a chance to like advise yourself
Mhm.
as like, we'll say maybe like a month or two after you got started in the recruiting world? What would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself to learn how to be a really good manager. I think that
Why?
was the one piece that, so we hired some really good people and we were really driven and we were a great partnership. Like my ex-husband and I were really good business partners. And we brought in really good people, but, I think I was so inexperienced in leading other people and managing that, I think it was I think I just would have felt a lot better about it had I been a kinder manager. I was I didn't I had to learn how to empower people instead of micromanage people, and that took me a long time, and I learned that the hard way.
Yeah, it's definitely a good lesson. It's tough, especially when you're first starting off and like you're growing a company and like everything is on the line for you financially. So like those are hard lessons to implement. So
Yeah.
kudos
And
to
the
you on
same
bringing that
thing
up.
when you promote people, if you're promoting people to manager too, it's really important to support them and teach them, get them tools that they need to learn how to be a manager.
Mhm. Awesome. Now, for the listeners that would like to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I'm all over LinkedIn. And I'm Diane Prince, and then my website is Diane Prince, so DIA. Yeah,
Okay. And I'll make sure to have that in the show notes. So all you have to do is scroll down and click on that to make it easy for you.
perfect.
And for the listeners out there, is there anything else that you would love to share with them before I let you go?
I would just say have fun. Like it's not that serious. Just do it and don't worry so much about what other people are doing, or and look at, like, always, okay, this I'll leave you with this: when you're thinking about going for it, that always ask yourself what's the best that could happen and what's the worst that could happen, and then make your decision.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you much for jumping on the podcast. I think there's going to be somebody that's listening to this, and I guarantee you within about 6 to 10 years, they're going to turn around and be like, this episode, the Elite Recruiter podcast, is what spurred me to build, scale, and sell my staffing company.
That's
So,
awesome.
and I cannot wait to hear that story. So,
Oh,
thank you guys for listening. Let's make 2024 your best year yet.
oh yeah.